623, 23 November 2002. This would be part 2 of Odds and Ends. So, we're going to start with one, it'll roll into another, and we're going to have a nice wrap up. Rising up. Anti-lockdown protests spread across Europe. As the alleged second wave of coronavirus pandemic is reported to be sweeping across Europe in the recent weeks, many governments have enthusiastically embraced their totalitarian side and granted themselves sweeping new emergency powers alongside new lockdown measures. Doesn't that sound really, really familiar with our little Democrat dictators? Yeah. The public has been markedly less cooperative this time around, rebelling against the seemingly arbitrary limitations which are not supported by either science or common sense. Protests have taken place all across the continent. In Germany, thousands of people gathered in Berlin over the last few days protesting the Merkel government passing a new lockdown law. Police turned water cannons on the crowds and nearly 200 people were arrested. In Spain, after the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, declared a 6-month state of emergency in late October. Wow, 6 months. There were days of protests across the country. Barcelona, already a hotbed of anti-government feeling due to the brutal repression of the Catalan independence referendum, saw violent confrontations between riot police and protesters. In France, Emmanuel Macron's brand new comprehensive security law, known by protesters as the gag law, would further militarize French police while making it a crime to capture or distribute the image of a police officer. It has met fervent resistance in the shape of angry marches through cities across the country. Macron's government has a history of attacking civil liberties, and in response to his reforms, the country has seen large-scale protests by the Gilets jaunes. I'm not sure who that is. I can find out. For over a year. In Italy, the anti-lockdown protests in Italy reached a fever pitch in late October and were probably the most extensive on the continent. Marches occurred in dozens of cities across the country, including Rome, Naples, Genoa, and Bologna. In Slovakia, Bratislava was home to a huge march of protesters on November 17th, marking the national holiday known as Fight for Freedom Day. These marches were illegal under the Slovakian emergency law, nationally designated to prevent the spread of coronavirus. In Denmark, the Danish parliament was subject to 9 days of protest right outside its doors in opposition to the proposed vaccination law, which would allow police to physically coerce vaccination through detainment. Makes me think of, I think it's in the Dallas area, Texas Department of Health, I believe, was going door to door looking for volunteers to voluntarily withdraw their blood to test for COVID-19 antibodies. So, yeah. After 9 days of protest, it was reported on social media that the Danish government had dropped the law. However, the writer of this article could find no official confirmation on that or reports in the media. In fact, the media have barely covered the proposed law and literally not mentioned the protest in Copenhagen at all. A search for COVID protest Denmark on Google turns up almost no results relating to that topic. The reason to cover the Danish protests less than the others is that they apparently worked. And the last thing the establishment wants people to see is that civil disobedience can change anything. It's good to see that the general public's fraying sense of patience with a COVID narrative that has never made any sense in a pandemic response, which is likely to do far more damage than it could ever prevent. Though civil arrest is undeniably a good and powerful thing, this is also a time to be wary. If the establishment feel they're losing control of the situation or the narrative, they're likely to double down or try something desperate. With that in mind, with the whole COVID narrative, the whole freaking BS COVID narrative, oh, it's out there. I've had it. I had coronavirus back in June. Oh, it sucked. It was the worst I've ever felt in my life. I had like 3 or 4 days of fever over 101, 102, something like that. Yeah. And I waited it out. So, oh, it's there. But suddenly there is nothing else on the planet that exists. Nothing. People don't get colds anymore. People don't have cancer anymore. People don't get pneumonia anymore. It's all COVID now. Everything. If you get into a motorcycle accident and you died of COVID, that was actually a report. So, and don't forget that on the 24th of January 2019, the Democratic Party introduced a bill into Congress called the CARES Act, which was passed and signed into law March of this year, 2020, by President Trump. The CARES Act was in response to the COVID emergency, which was introduced into Congress on January the 24th, 2019. That's something you can actually find in the congressional record like I did. I heard about it, found a link, looked it up, and yeah, the CARES Package, COVID Relief Act, signed into law this year, was introduced January 24th, 2019. You can actually track it making its way through Congress. So, post-lockdown SARS-CoV type 2 nucleic acid screening in nearly 10 million residents of Wuhan, China. Abstract. Stringent COVID-19 control measures were imposed in Wuhan between January 23 and April the 8th of 2020. Estimates of the prevalence of infection following the release of restrictions could inform post-lockdown pandemic management. Here we describe a citywide SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid screening program between May 14 and June 1 of 2020 in Wuhan. All city residents aged 6 years or older were eligible, and 9,899,828, or 92.9% of the population participated. No new symptomatic cases and 300 asymptomatic cases with a detection rate of 0.303 per 10,000. Per 10,000, or 95%, or 0.270 to 0.339 out of 10,000 were identified. There were no positive cases amongst the 1,174 close contacts of asymptomatic cases. 107 of the 34,424 previously recovered COVID-19 patients tested positive again. So that's a retest positive rate of 0.31%. 0.31%. The prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in Wuhan was therefore very low 5 to 8 weeks after the end of lockdown. And we have people actively talking about destroying this economy. In various lockdowns or stages of lockdowns, even Biden's advisors suggesting 4 to 6 weeks of an additional shutdown. These people don't know anything about economics, have never owned a business. Less than half of Americans likely to comply with new COVID lockdown, from Gallup. Earlier, they featured a worrisome prospect of a second national coronavirus lockdown under a future Biden administration, considering the latest scientists to join Joe Biden's special coronavirus transition advisory team. He's calling for just that. Dr. Michael Osterholm, who serves as director for the Center of Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, now one of Biden's coronavirus task force doctors, told Yahoo News the following this past Wednesday or so. Quote, "We could pay for a package right now to cover all the lost wages for individual workers. If we did that, then we could lock down for 4 to 6 weeks. Hell, the Democrats have stalled anything for the American people. I think they're on their 20th or 22nd rejection of any money going to the people because the Republicans don't like the fact that there's writers in them. If it's not directed specifically against the American to benefit the American people who have lost wages, who have lost jobs, lost their livelihoods because of this senseless lockdown, these insane, senseless lockdowns. If it's not directly benefiting the people, then why are the Democrats continuously bringing it up? But as we all know, that's unlikely to go well based on the latest polling data, as it appears the majority of Americans would not conform to such new stay-at-home orders and travel restrictions. Americans are less likely to comply with another coronavirus lockdown than they were in the spring, with fewer than half saying in a new poll that they're very likely to stay home this time around, according to a new Gallup poll released as record numbers of cases skyrocket nationwide. And I would probably, if I had the numbers, if I had that research, I'll bet you I could dispute it. Remember, it was released that out of all the deaths, so-called the deaths that were happening because of COVID, it turned out that the error rate was 94% were not directly COVID related. That means that, well, hell, it means that 94% of all these deaths that people have said were skyrocketing, 94% aren't directly related to COVID. You know, one of the things that I read is that cancer, is taking a huge hit because cancer and everything else has been put to the wayside because everything is COVID. But, you know, as some people who are pushing this Great Reset business have pointed out, is that everything is in place because of COVID for this Great Reset. All the restrictions on people, their work, their travel, their recreation. All these things that's just been clamped down on. It's a great way to control whole populations. That's exactly what's happening. You need to follow up on the Great Reset. I'm ordering a book about the Great Reset from the guy who wrote it. Klaus Schwab. Here's the data, according to Gallup, based on the poll taken between October 19 and November 1. 49% that say they're very likely to stay home for a month if mandated, down from 67% who said down from 67 who said they would in the spring. 18% said they were somewhat likely to comply. 1/3 said that they would be unlikely to comply with new lockdown orders. This despite 61% saying they believe the situation is getting worse. It's only because of the media. The number of respondents who said they'd be unlikely to comply is double the rate seen from polls in the spring. However, it appears more Americans are intentional about social distancing measures, including wearing masks, compared to in the spring. And of course, there's even news. There's research out of Denmark saying it makes no difference. It made no difference in their study whether or not people had on masks. It's just about control. And it's one thing if, there's sort of a social control, maybe you should be wearing a mask, that kind of thing. It's another when that translates into the realm of employment. Oh, you have to wear a mask or your job is at risk, or your continued occupation, your continued employment is at risk over something that's disputed. As Newsmax summarizes the numbers, meanwhile, the number of people who are wearing masks have gone up sharply. Okay. The report states only about half of Americans reported in April that they were wearing masks just after the CDC suggested wearing them. Now, 88% reported they wear masks after the number went up to 92% in July. So, California's governor imposed a curfew on social gatherings and other non-essential activities in one of the most intrusive of the restrictions being ordered across the country to curb an alarming surge in novel coronavirus infections. The stay-at-home order will go into effect from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. each day starting this past Saturday and ending on the morning of December 21, covering 41 of California's 58 counties and the vast majority of its population, Governor Gavin Newsom said. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer declared this past Sunday night, well, not like yesterday, but the other week, that the state will effectively enter lockdown again, announcing several directives that must be adhered to by businesses and individuals. The Detroit News noted that the new policies will temporarily halt in-person instruction in high schools and colleges, dine-in service at restaurants and bars, and high school athletics, as well as close some businesses, including movie theaters, bowling alleys, and casinos. Under the order, indoor residential gatherings will also be limited to 2 households at any one time. The restrictions will take effect this past Wednesday and will be in place until December 8th, according to the report. Whitmer described the lockdown as a 3-week pause. Among other questionable actions, the governor issued the state's emergency alerts. The governor used the state's emergency alert system to order residents to wear face masks after issuing an executive order mandating the masks. Whitmer also called small business owners racists and neo-Nazis for protesting her lockdown orders. Lori Lightfoot tells Chicago, cancel Thanksgiving, avoid family days after hosting a crowded Biden street party. Yeah, do as I say, that sort of thing. Lightfoot issued a stay-at-home advisory for Chicago, which went into effect November 16, 2020 at 6 a.m. last week. She told residents to stay home unless for essential reasons, to stop having guests over, including family members, and to cancel traditional Thanksgiving plans. That's from the realms and the depths of political hypocrisy. Portland, Oregon. Days before Thanksgiving, Oregon Governor Kate Brown said she believes residents who know their neighbors are violating the most recent round of COVID-19 protocols should call the police. Though, which also includes capping the number of people allowed in your home at a maximum of 6. Yeah, narc on your neighbors. This is no different than what happens if there's a party down the street and it's keeping everyone awake, Brown said in an interview Friday. What do neighbors do in that case? They call law enforcement because it's too noisy. This is just like that. It's a violation of a noise ordinance. The restrictions known as a freeze were implemented this week via an executive order by the governor. For the next 2 weeks in Oregon and 4 weeks in Multnomah County, residents are banned from eating out at restaurants and going to the gym, among other restrictions. Social gatherings in their homes are also limited to no more than 6 people. Violators could face up to 30 days in jail and $1,250 in fines or both. On Friday, Marion County Sheriff's Office said in a statement, "We recognize that we cannot arrest or enforce our way out of the pandemic, and we believe both are counterproductive to public health goals." So good for you, Marion County Sheriff's Office. Airlines to require health pass, vaccine certificate before allowing passengers to fly. Airlines are likely to require passengers to sign up for a health pass, which includes a digital certificate of vaccination against COVID-19 before allowing them to fly, according to a new report. The system would be similar in nature to that being considered by Ticketmaster, who it was revealed earlier this week are considering making customers prove they've had the vaccine or a negative coronavirus test before allowing them to purchase tickets. Ticketmaster later clarified that the final decision on such measures would be up to event organizers, but they were still mulling over the implementation of the system. Now, according to a new report by Axios, airlines are likely to follow the same model. Quote, 3 global alliances representing 58 airlines are pushing governments to allow widespread COVID-19 testing of passengers instead of existing quarantine restrictions that they argue are ineffective and have killed travel demand. Airline passengers would be subject to similar measures being considered by Ticketmasters, whereby they would have to verify they've been vaccinated or tested negative 24 to 72 hours before the flight. The bottom line, no health pass, no admittance, and perhaps no flying, states the report. The system would likely be organized under the auspices of Common Pass, a program sponsored by the World Economic Forum, which is pushing for a post-COVID Great Reset that would transform the world, with Uber and other companies also beginning to refuse services to people who fail to comply with coronavirus restrictions. The new normal will likely create a lower caste of refuseniks who are barred from traveling, any form of social life, and in the future, even basic financial services. And imagine, wouldn't all this Great Reset coronavirus crap be the perfect setup for a social credit system? Oh, you don't care about your neighbor. You're not a good citizen. You're just not a good participant of the community. Well, maybe you'll just get a bad social credit rating until you can reform and see the error of your ways. Yeah. Oh, by the way, interestingly enough, I read about the Chinese social credit system a year or so ago, and I read about that, and I mean, people were being denied home loans, that sort of thing, in China. Bad social credit rating. This is right after I watched, I think it was season 1, don't remember which episode of The Orville, in which that precise thing, the use of a social credit rating system, was used on this planet, on the planet they were on. So yeah, check that out. I don't remember which episode it was, but that was really interesting, very, very prescient. And I look at that and I think, well, here we are today I'm not going to say who could have foreseen that, but for heaven's sake, if Congress had the wisdom, the forethought to craft a CARES Act, a coronavirus relief bill, and submit it before Congress on the 24th of January 2019, 1 year before we actually saw the coronavirus hit our shores, I really need their crystal ball. I really, really do. I'd probably use it for the lottery or something, because that's really amazing predictive skills. Yeah. It wasn't even anything to analyze at the time, so you can't even say predictive analysis. I think that's it. That is it. Sig 2 3 out.